What's going on, guys? So we are back with another best of episode for the podcast. And today we're going to be recapping 3 more rules for Jiu-Jitsu. We're going to start off with episode 174, and that's going to be rule number 4, which is roll to win. The next episode we're going to be pulling our rule from is episode 178, and that's rule for Jiu-Jitsu number 5, and that is the paradox of improving for BJJ. And then the last rule for Jiu-Jitsu comes from episode 185. It's rules for Jiu-Jitsu number 6, and that's don't judge a book by its cover. Thank you guys for checking out the episode. Let's get into it.
Big thanks to our sponsor for helping make the podcast happen, Epic Roll, for being a longtime sponsor of the podcast. They make a lot of great jiu-jitsu gear. I get a lot of my stuff made through them, both for my jiu-jitsu brand, but also the gym that I have, like our gis and rash guards and stuff. I get their stuff, great quality stuff, good customer service. They take care of you if you need something, if something goes wrong. They've got everything from t-shirts and rash guards and shorts. And I mean, everything and anything jiu-jitsu related, they make it. They're one of the manufacturers that PGF uses, the professional grappling uses, that to help make their stuff for some of the teams. I don't know if they still are, but they were last season. But again, if you guys want to check them out and just browse through their website, see if you find anything you like, go to their website at epicrollbjj.com, EPICROLLBJJ.com. And when you get there, checkout code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Charlotte's Web. They are one of the OGs in the CBD space, the cannabinoid space. And again, they have a really well-tested, well-produced product. Again, CBD is one of those weird things where it's an unregulated market, right? So the FDA doesn't have it locked down like they do a lot of other things. And so they've done studies before where the CBD market is all over the place, where, you think you're getting this, but you're really getting this, or you think you're getting X amount, but really you're not getting that much. You're getting less than that. And so they're one of the good guys in the CBD space where they're making a lot of good products. Everything's third-party tested, so you can ensure the quality of it is there. And then also, you know what you're putting in your body. On top of that, they have a lot of other different products, things like CBN products, which are great for trying to help you get more sleep. And again, as we get older, that's kind of an important thing. It's one of our main tools for recovery. Is that everybody wants to pop TRT and everything else, and that's perfectly fine. Of course, do what you want to do, but getting your sleep habits into check is really useful, and CBN products can be really helpful to that. They also make some functional mushroom products as well, balms and rubs, anything and everything, just tons of stuff. Take a look at their website, charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order at checkout. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast directly, you can check us out at patreon.com/the Chewjitsu podcast. When you go to the website, you can look at what we have to offer. There's a bunch of perks. And again, it's a very inexpensive price. And so again, when you join up, you get a ton of perks for, it's super cheap. We're practically giving the damn thing away. You spend more at like McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever place you go to, in one visit, and you're done. And so again, if you guys want to check it out, go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. We give you guys a bunch of extra content and exclusive stuff. And on top of that, you get to support the podcast that you're listening to, and we appreciate it. Last but not least, guys, if you want to get my daily email, the Chew Crew email, check it out at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up to the Chewjitsu email, you will get my daily email, as I said, almost daily. And then on top of that, I will send you an ebook that goes through 12 different strategies on improving jiu-jitsu faster through focused rolling. And the ebook can give you some different strategies. There's also a video in case you don't want to read, if you just want to listen to me tell you. There's an ebook and a video that goes with it. But it'll give you over 12 different strategies on how to improve with focus. It's one of the most important things. And if you're an older grappler, you have limited time. And I just say this because I know our demographics. We got older people. If you're an older grappler, you have limited time training. And so you can't screw around with like, I'm just going to show up and, hey, I'm here. That's fine early on. But again, as soon as you start to actually have a little bit of skill under your belt, you want to start giving it some focus and start directing it. And you don't have to be a black belt to do that. I show you how to do it both from white and to black belt and everything in between. So check it out at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN, to get the daily email and get the ebook that I give away in the video. Today's rule is roll to win. Do not roll not to lose. Now, obviously, there are times where you may not roll to win. I just want to sort of preface this with this, right? We're speaking in sort of generalities. But when you're competing and when you're rolling in order to do your best, we're going to say it that way, in order to do your best and to express your jiu-jitsu abilities to the best of their potential, you've got to roll to win and do not roll not to lose. And I bring this up because this past week I got messages from people who just went to the Pans. Pans just finished up at the time of recording this. And two people who follow me who have basically they're dealing with the same thing, but they have different outcomes. So one was a guy who said that he was asking me about if I think sports psychology is a good idea. And I was asking him kind of why he asked that. And he said that it's because he is really struggling with just getting out of his mentally getting out of his own way and going for it. He says in the gym, he's one of these people that competes or that rolls very well, and he's able to do a lot of cool stuff. But then when he goes to the competition, he kind of he shells up for a good portion of the match and doesn't finally begin to show his true game until it's too late for him to really make a difference. And so he's wondering, he was just kind of talking to me about, that ability to roll to win, not to lose, instead of not to lose. And then there was a woman who sent me a message who just won Pans. She won at purple belt. And she sent me a message and said that she had been watching my videos leading up to the competition that she was getting ready for. And she was very nervous about it. And she said she won the Pans and was blown away by her own performances. She's almost like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And she sent me this really beautiful message. And it was saying that, she went out there and the words that stuck with her the most, or the idea that stuck with her the most, was simply just forget about losing and winning. And if, things are going to happen, wins are going to come, losses are going to come, someone's going to get their hand raised, right? But go out there and give them hell. Get out there and get after someone, and no matter what happens, let the chips fall as they may, but make sure that you go out there and you do your best to just give it everything you got. And with that mentality, she ended up winning her matches and ended up placing in the open as well. And so this idea of rolling to win instead of not to lose is a big deal, because a lot of people suffer with it. If you're one of these people who struggles a bit, like I did, I struggled with this as well, of maybe you train pretty well, but then when you go to competitions, you have a tendency to lock up. Or if you go to your gym and you have a tendency to lock up, I'm one of those guys where I used to struggle with that as well, where when I would go up against guys, I used to be so afraid of losing that I couldn't even perform my best in the gym. I'm going to share some stories and share some ideas that'll hopefully be useful to you. So I don't really have this problem anymore, and I'll talk about how I got over it. But there's some interesting things that happened early on when I was coming up in jiu-jitsu. I had these shades, or I got a taste of what it's like to roll to win rather than being so focused on the loss. So one of the first ones in jiu-jitsu was when I competed as a white belt up against a purple belt. I've told this story numerous times, where basically I'm going around talking to all the different people that are at the tournament, and I'm asking them how long they've been training. And in this particular no-gi division, they combined white belt to purple belt. And so I'm talking to all these guys that have been training, and a lot of these guys have been training, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, a lot longer than I had been training. I've been training really at this point, maybe 6 months. Now I had some wrestling to go with it, but again, jiu-jitsu, only 6 months or so. And so, I knew that I was probably going to get smashed. And so the idea of even winning the thing was gone. I didn't think about it anymore because it wasn't going to happen. So my only focus was, all right, I'm going to get smashed. Let's see how I can do. Because again, at the time, my coach was a purple belt, and several of the guys in this division were purple belts. So I'm like, my coach kills me, so I'm going to get killed by all these guys. So, hey, let's just have some fun. And so I go out there and I compete against a purple belt who had actually taken second at Pans the year before in the gi, and I ended up beating him like 6-2. Beat him on 3 takedowns, and he had 1 sweep on me. And I did pretty well in that match, and I was so surprised. But it was so funny because there was no pressure. I normally had pressure when I would compete, and I would nervousness and all that stuff. When I got out on the mat and I saw my opponent, I saw that it was him. And I remember him saying he had been training for like 6 years or something. I just laughed. I was like, I even came up to him. I said, hey man, don't hurt me too bad today. And I ended up winning. It was very strange. And then it was interesting because then the very next match, I went up against another purple belt who had 8 years of experience on me. And now I was thinking about maybe I could win. And it probably wouldn't have changed the outcome because the guy that I was going against, he's actually a teammate now. His name's Spider is the name we call him. It's his nickname. But I didn't pull the trigger like I did before.
Yeah.
There was another one because I dealt with this problem for a long time. There was one when I was a young black belt. Like when I got to black belt, I won tournaments, right? I won plenty of tournaments, but I always had this gnawing feeling that I would only every now and then see glimpses of who I could be in competition. Because for some reason, when I would go to competitions, I would intermittently have these really good performances. And then sometimes I would have these performances where I shelled up and I was not as aggressive as I thought I could be. And I didn't show my true game. And as a black belt, I was still struggling with this early on. And as a black belt, it became kind of tough because I was in a space where I was now a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I never thought I would be a black belt in jiu-jitsu. There was nobody in my area of Louisville, Kentucky, in the nearby areas that were really competing much as a black belt. I could go a few hours away and train with some, but not in my area. There were no other black belts really competing. And so for me, I'm trekking new ground, so to speak. And it's sometimes you don't know what to do. And so I was going against black belts and really struggling with this idea, like, man, like, do I even belong in these divisions? That thought was with me when I first started competing. And one of my very first matches that kind of got rid of any of this was I competed at this, literally I'm sitting on my buddy's patio. We're having some beers and we're enjoying his birthday. I had just been promoted to black belt maybe a week or two before. And my buddy that ran a tournament gave me a call. He said, "Hey man, we had a black belt have to back out last minute. We're looking for a replacement for this invite tournament that we set up. Can you do it?" And I looked at my buddy, looked at the phone. I said, "Sure, man, I can do it. No problem." So I finished my beer and I was like, "All right, we're going to keep it to one beer tonight because if I had two beers, probably going to have a hangover because I'm a lightweight." And the next day I went and competed. And I remember I was nervous, but when I got out there, I got swept. I was down 6 points, 4 for a mount and 1-2 for a sweep. And then I immediately rallied back, made my points back up. And then me and this guy, we just had a shootout back and forth. The match ended, I think it was like 12-13 or 14 or something. And I almost had a guard pass where I would have won the match. It was a great match. And I remember there was a guy named Sean who I saw compete a lot of times as a black belt. Really good guy. I had a lot of respect for him. And he came up to me and was like, "Man, you looked really good, dude. You belong at this division." I know, he kind of just said it in passing, but it stuck with me. And so it was, again, it's funny how this worked. As a young black belt, I had this weird thing where in my early matches as a black belt, like my first I would say first 15 or so, if I lost, if I got swept first, like within the first few minutes of the match, this happened like almost all the time. It happened several of the matches. I would typically come back and win those matches because what happened was I was no longer worried about losing or winning because I was losing. I was losing the match. I was backed into a corner. I have to go. Mm-hmm. And it was like once I was relinquished from the idea of having the win, of that there was a possibility that I was going to lose something. Once that was gone, I mean, my game would open up and I would rally back and have these beautiful performances. And then it would be weird because then when I would go to competitions where I didn't get a score on immediately, I was much slower. And even if I won, I really wasn't that satisfied with the performance because I didn't really show anything. It's like, I did enough to get by. I did enough to win. Sometimes I even lost those matches, but I didn't show what I could do. Right. And I think there really is something to us as humans. We search for ways of expression. Like that's really what we're doing. We're doing this thing, and this thing is like expression. And if you can't express yourself fully, it's frustrating. It's like as if you know the words that you want to use to talk to someone, but then trying to mouth it, and you can't mouth it. You can't say it. It's almost like right now with my sense of taste where it's just coming back, and I can't fully taste everything. It's like, I know what this is supposed to taste like. I know what this is supposed to smell like, but I can't fully get it out. And that's a lot of times the struggle that I was running into it as a black belt, where I was struggling with that, where, I was like trying to get this stuff out, get these moves out, but I struggled. So one of the things that I started to just sort of put together from looking at it, from back at it. Oh, I forgot one more story that I'll throw in, and then we'll get into the takeaway. One of the situations that happened numerous times in the gym was I would get into these states of, we would say, flow, right? These states of flow seemed to happen more often when I did not care about what was going on. A great example was with a very common story that I share all the time, was when I was training with one of my black belt buddies back when I was a brown belt. He was such a tough training partner with me, and I was always so worried about giving up anything when we were rolling. I was always worried about it because he would make me pay. He'd make me pay with like a lot of pressure and everything else. And so I didn't want to make a mistake. And a lot of times our matches would be very boring and very like, we would stalemate. And then sometimes he would get the better of, most of the time he would get the better of me. One day we rolled. I was sick that day. And by sick, I mean, I just didn't feel very good, right? It ended up not being an actual illness. I just didn't feel very good. I felt sluggish, whatever. And I got up that morning and I was like, man, I don't feel good. I ate a very small meal that morning, which is unusual for me. I usually eat a pretty good sized breakfast. Just couldn't deal with the food. Had some coffee and I was on my way. We rolled with each other that day after doing the drilling. We were getting ready for a competition at the time, which is why I went to the gym anyway, because we were getting ready for a competition. And I remember having this feeling of like, there's nothing I can do to stop him today. I'm just going to play damage control because I'm tired. I'm sluggish. I don't feel my normal self. He's going to whoop my butt. And then we rolled together. And it was the strangest thing where, because I didn't care and because I wasn't trying to muscle him and because I wasn't afraid of anything, I was doing really well. And it was so strange because just like a few days before, on Thursday, he was beating my butt all over the mat. Saturday comes, and now like it's like I jumped. It's like I got better. And part of it was maybe because I did get better, but part of it I think was because of the mindset, because I simply just didn't care anymore. And it allowed me to be a little bit more free to try things and to look for solutions to the problem and to experiment. And it was so strange to him because I remember he kept asking me, he's like, bro, we got to roll again. He wouldn't let me roll with anybody else that day because he wanted to like, get his win on me. He's like, all right, I want to get one on you. Like, you just beat me twice. I'm going to get you at least once. But he didn't. It was just such a bizarre thing. And so putting all that together, there were more experiences, but those experiences are kind of indicative of things inside the gym and in competition that I was dealing with. And eventually I started to look back at it and said, man, when I get really obsessed with the win, I don't do very well. Like when I'm obsessed with the outcome, the end result, the outcome. When I get obsessed with that, I don't do very well. When I get obsessed with simply just doing what I can do in the moment, I do really well. Right? Like when I'm obsessed with like just hitting a technique, when I no longer care, when the idea of the win and the loss is no longer even in my thoughts, I'm just so clear to actually do what I'm supposed to do. And that is a liberating thing both in the gym and in competition, because a lot of times, so if you're one of those people where you feel like you do better in the gym than you do competitions, you're probably like me and you're focused on winning. You're focused on getting on the podium. You're focused on all these things as if you already have them. And so therefore you're playing not to lose because you don't want to lose it. Essentially, you're like, you feel like you've already got this win. You're seeing yourself on the podium as if you won the match, but you haven't won anything. Yep. And you go out there as if you have something to lose. You have nothing to lose because you haven't won anything yet. But if you go out there with that kind of mentality, it's a bad thing. This is how I interpret it for myself. In the gym, it's a very similar thing where you go in and you train with someone and you're rolling with people as if you're trying not to lose some edge or something on someone, right? Like you don't want to expose something. You don't want to try something new because you don't want to get smashed afterwards. And I'm not saying you have to just be reckless and not be intelligent with your role, but you have to be free of that kind of mentality because it's not useful, especially in the gym when the gym is your lab. The gym is how you experiment. If you can't experiment, I mean, even if you are better than a certain number of people in your gym, if you can't experiment to create new things in your game, you're going to find very quickly that you're going to be passed up. That was something that I ran into early on. I experimented when I was younger. Then once I got to a certain level and I was kind of good, I was doing the same stuff over and over again. And that's, led to a lot of struggles there. Now, for me, part of me getting over this stuff was simply recognizing that that's what was going on. And as I've said many times on the podcast, awareness in itself is transformative because simply being aware that that's your problem. I'm focused on winning and I haven't won anything yet. I'm getting so focused on the end result and I'm not focused on what I'm supposed to do. I started to really be focused on my game plan. So like leading up to the competition, I would drill all the time. So this way, I'm making sure that, especially the week of, I'm drilling my stuff. And then the weeks before the matches and the competitions, I'd be using my specific movements. So this way, when the day of the competition comes, I only have one thing to focus on, and that's my techniques. That's it. And then also I started looking at it, I was realizing if I win, it feels good, but then I just kind of want to go compete again, right? It only lasts for a little bit. If I lose, it stings for a little bit. And I actually figure out some new stuff that I need to do in my game, but like nobody hates me. Nobody thinks any differently of me. And the sting only lasts for a little bit. So it really doesn't matter. It's pretty inconsequential, but the feeling of not being able to express who I am on the mats to the full potential, that's the worst part. Right. And there were matches where, for instance, in the match where my first black belt match where I lost, but like I was talking about earlier where I lost, but it was a really good match and I came back from all these points. That match, I had a blast. I was very proud of that match because I had some beautiful sweeps using positions that like I don't even normally use at the time. I was using like X guard and stuff and I wasn't really good at X guard yet, but it was like a position I'd been working on. And all of a sudden it's, oh my God, I'm using X guard on a black belt and whatever. And all this stuff's happening. I was satisfied with that loss. Whereas then there were matches where I didn't perform to the best of my ability and it wasn't, I actually won, but even with the win, I didn't feel good about it. And so again, everybody's different, but for me, what became far more important was how I expressed myself. And one of the things that, people, if they watch any of my matches in the last probably 6 years or so, what you'll notice is that I'm very aggressive. And I'm aggressive to immediately get after there. I'm usually done my first takedown attempt or guard pull attempt within the first 30 seconds usually, which is not like most people take a little bit longer to start the matches. I'm starting to start off right out of the gate. Like one of my matches at the Pans last year, I scored a takedown in within 17 seconds of the match starting, and that's because I'm focused on the techniques. I've already drilled them a bunch and I don't care what happens. Right. I mean, it's really that I want to win deeply. I really do because I like winning. It feels good, but I am not attached to it anymore because I can't be, because it'll mess you up. It's the same thing. This is true for anything that I do. Like for instance, if I make a video worried about the amount of views that it's going to get that's the only thing I'm worried about. It's going to be a terrible video because then I'm going to be so focused on doing everything perfectly when in reality it should be focused on like, I'm going to try to help this person out. Right. If we do the podcast the same way, you're going to get in your own way. If I do anything, if I create anything, do anything with that same mentality of not wanting to lose and whatever else, then you get in your own way mentally. And meditation helped as well because again, meditation for me has been a way to, and I don't just mean like a seated meditation where you're still, because those are great, but there's different forms of meditation. But meditation practices where you start to like look at your own BS a little bit. So I remember like having the sensation, and I know that most people won't be able to necessarily relate to this, but I remember going to compete once. This is a number of years ago, and I'm getting ready to compete. And I'm looking at my opponent that I have in the finals. And I'm kind of like, man, he looks tough, whatever. And I'm kind of like thinking about whether or not I'm good enough to do this or whatever. And then I started to ask myself questions. Like, Chewy, this is myself talking to myself. Like, when you go to gyms, how many black belts thrash you? None. Like, the only time that black belts thrash you is when it's like a really high level black belt, like a JT Torres or a Muhammad Ali or someone of this nature, right? This is true. So why is this person going to just simply thrash you? Probably not going to happen, right? I ended up winning the match. And again, I still lose from time to time, but I don't get thrashed, right? And so I think that this is important too, is we do so much evidence. We develop so much evidence in the gym a lot of times, and even in other competitions in our travels and stuff like that to other gyms about how good we actually are. But then when we're faced with stressful situations, we get nervous and we can completely ignore that stuff. And so part of my struggle, was simply just to realize, like, man, you're way better than you're giving yourself credit for in these situations. Remember all the evidence that you've built up over the years in the gym and at other competitions and other things. And you have all this mounting evidence in the contrary to what you're feeling like in this stressful situation. And it was useful to have those mental conversations with myself about that stuff previously. And that was really useful to me. Again, that still requires a lot of hard work. That still requires you to get out there and, test yourself, because again, that's how you find out what you're capable of. But as you go on this path and you start to do this stuff, it's wise to remember that stuff as you go through it, and remember those moments of when you win and when you do well, and that was you. That's possible. And so, again, there's just some different ideas, but the big one, like I said, a lot of times for me is that, and I'm sure most people experience this on some level, if you start to find those glimpses of when you're not worried about winning and losing, and if you find that you start to do better, then that's letting you know that, again, that's what you're capable of. And that's not a fleeting thing. And you can access it. It's not like some ephemeral state that you can't get into. The problem is you have to get out of your own way, and you have to lose this obsession with like the outcome. It has to be just simply, we'd say the process, but again, you have to go for the win. And again, the win to me does not mean that it's a weird thing. When I say roll to win, it's not even like rolling with the intention of, I have to get my hand raised. It's with the intention of trying to use everything that I have to the best of my abilities, because that's the only way that I'm going to win. But that's really the focus. Because when I think about my own wins and when I think about most people, that's the way that they win. They win when they're not hindered by any thought about the win, when they're not worried about the loss, when they're simply just going out there and attacking. What's up, guys? So today we've got another podcast for kind of a rule for your jiu-jitsu. This is one, I think probably like a third of my questions that I get online probably revolve around understanding this idea. Some form, maybe not directly, but if you understand this, I think about it, probably a third of my questions kind of could center around this idea. And this is something where when I understood this idea that we're about to get into, it allowed me to become a much more effective grappler. I became more creative. I was able to compete more effectively, where I could compete and I was not constantly worried about like the what ifs. And, what if this doesn't happen? And what if this doesn't happen? And which happens a lot of times. A lot of people compete, or even when they're rolling against tough people, they start to worry too much about what's going to happen rather than what's going on right now and everything else. But the idea that I think you really have to understand as far as when it becomes to progressing in jiu-jitsu and doing really, really well with it. And I honestly, I'm doing this for jiu-jitsu, but I think you could take this into multiple areas of your life. You could probably just sit down and think of the idea and replace jiu-jitsu and progression with different subjects. But the idea that I would like to share with you is that you have to understand the paradox of jiu-jitsu progression. So getting into it, here's kind of what I mean. There's this side of jiu-jitsu where you have to remove your dependency on the outcome. A lot of times this gets worded as something like trust the process, love the journey, not the destination, that kind of thing. Things that, at some point become almost cliche, but it's correct. Again, because just like I said earlier, when you detach yourself from the immediate outcome, it really helps free up your mental space. Again, as I said, I experienced this burst of creativity and skill gain in jiu-jitsu once I really started to understand that idea. And we'll talk about understanding versus recognizing something in just a second. And the reason for this is because if you become too dependent on the outcome from every single training session, every single roll, every executed technique, it's really hard to make the failures necessary to progress in the long term. And we all understand this. We all understand that like failures are the currency by which you pay for the future success that you're going to have. I've said that before, and but it's something that's really important to understand, because when you're in the middle of those failures, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable, and no one wants to be there. I say this to you as someone who's failed more times than I can possibly count. I remember recently on YouTube, someone asked me, said, Chewy, what's your overall grappling record? Since high school, like wrestling. I'm like, shit, if I know at this point, like it's been too many, like I don't know. It's like I've been competing for 20 years. I've lost count. Wrestling, you're getting, you'd have in the 30s matches, typically around 30-ish matches in high school wrestling per year. And then if you did anything outside of that, the year, you could get more matches, but around 30 for the high school season, which is only like 3 months or so, 3-4 months. So it's not very long. And, and then in jiu-jitsu, it was like, when it was in the beginning, it was very small because tournaments were small, but typically you do double divisions. So you might have a day where you get like 6 to 8 matches, which is a lot of matches. I mean, I know Brandon competed and had, God, what did he have? He had,
he had 7
he had 7 matches, four in his division and like 3 in the open. 7 matches is a ton, bro. It's a lot of matches. I remember competing at like this ADCC trials in 2018, and I had 6, for the most part, 6 tough matches. 6 matches is a lot of matches, because if anybody's ever competed before, you understand, like, 1 match can be a ton. And, and so again, we understand that the failures are going to happen, and some of those matches aren't going to go your way. And so you can't be dependent upon the outcome of those things, because the failures are going to happen too often. And if you get so wrapped up and dependent on those things, you're going to get bummed out pretty quickly. It's probably not going to be a fun sport for you, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Now, I said it's a paradox, which means that we have a contradictory idea meshing with that one, right? That's what it means to have a paradox. So here's the flip side to it. You still have to recognize good and bad performances, good jiu-jitsu versus bad jiu-jitsu, or if you perhaps, want to church it up a little bit, we can say well executed versus poorly executed techniques. Because when you fail, you can't simply dust it off and under the rug and say, I'm focused on my journey, right? You have to look at it. You have to break it apart. These things that happen to you have to break it apart, dissect the failures you had, and crack open the lessons there are to be learned from the experiences, right? So you have to be detached from the outcome. But then when the failures happen, you have to be objective about them, and you got to take a magnifying glass to them and figure out like what happened here, right? That you have to understand the good from the bad, because there is good and bad jiu-jitsu. It's as simple as that. And we all understand that. And again, I typically don't say people suck. I just say that they're not trained well, or they're untrained. But again, we can all understand that we have good and bad performances. And so the paradox is there's this balancing act going on in jiu-jitsu all the time. You have to roll like failures don't even exist, right? You have to take chances, and you got to go for things as if the failures aren't even it's not even a thing, right? Mm-hmm. On the flip side, though, you have to objectively look at the failures with that magnifying glass and really see what's going on. And truly understanding this idea is one of the key ingredients for having a good mindset for getting better at jiu-jitsu. And in my bearded opinion, better at just about anything. Because, all too often, people will become so worried about the outcomes that they don't even get started, right? Like there's so many things that, talk to anybody. We're all guilty of this, myself included. There have been things in our life that we never started or wanted to start, or maybe should have started earlier, right? But we didn't do those things because we were worried about the potential outcome, which, a lot of times is what happens if it fails? What happens if someone laughs at me? What happens if, a million things, the what ifs. We look back at those times either with regret, or in some cases when we do them later on, the thing that we think is, man, I wish I would have started this sooner. A lot of you listening to this might even be thinking this about jiu-jitsu. One of the common messages I get from people, there's like, Chewy, your videos help me get started. at like 30, 40, whatever you got started at, you're a little bit older. Yeah, even in your 20s, people send me messages saying, Chewy, your videos helped me get started. And, I'm getting started. I was going to start back, X amount of years ago, but I didn't because I was worried. Finally got started. And they're so happy that they've done it. And so again, that's the idea that I wanted to share with you guys. Now, here is the difference between understanding this and recognizing it. You could word this differently, but there's an idea of recognizing. So for instance, in jiu-jitsu, you can recognize a technique, but have no real understanding of how it works and how to do it. For instance, you can have a casual fan of mixed martial arts who can watch a fight with you and he can recognize an armbar. He knows what it is, or he can see that rear naked choke, right? Put him in there, right? Rear naked choke, right? Like put him in that armbar. I don't know why. I don't know why my.
Do you ever seen that video or no? It's like a picture of these two Indian guys, and like one's putting an arm bar on, and he doesn't even have his legs at all between the arm.
Oh yeah.
It's like it's the most. I love watching. I love seeing it. People always put different memes on it.
Yeah.
But I was like, just the balls to post that and be like, look at this technique. Like even just posting stuff when you're like you have no idea what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing about getting started too. Like I think sometimes just not feeling like you have enough experience to even like put yourself out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the idea is you can recognize it. You can recognize that it's a good idea to understand this paradox, this dichotomy between the two. You can recognize that it could be useful, but understanding it on a deep visceral level is a different thing, because what happens is you have to practice. This is another thing. You have to practice this stuff with, like, when you talk about mindsets and mental approaches.
Yeah,
they're just like the physical stuff. You have to get your reps in. You have to take time. And when the moments where you get frustrated or you start to notice that you're getting nervous about an outcome, or you're getting apprehensive, or you're doing the what if stuff, you have to practice getting rid of that stuff. You have to be conscious of it. And likewise, when you have losses and you have failures, you have to be conscious of going back and looking at them. This is something that this is one of the biggest struggles I had as a young guy when I was in jiu-jitsu, where I had so much wrapped up in my identity as a jiu-jitsu guy and as a grappler. And, it was part of me. It was like the thing that it was like the one thing in my life that I was actually good at. Right. And so because I was good at it, and it was like the one thing that I was really good at up to that point in my life, I clung to it. So anytime I didn't do well, bro, I was shot. I couldn't watch my losses. It literally, I didn't want to watch them. We had VHS tapes, and I'd fast forward past them, and I wouldn't look at the lessons. So I kept making the same damn mistakes over and over again. And then when I was competing, I was always hamstrung. I was always one of those dudes that was better in the gym than he was in competition, because in the gym, I was having fun. I was playing. But in competition, I was so worried about what if I lose, even though I lost plenty of times and it really didn't matter. But I didn't like it. My ego didn't really enjoy it. And it doesn't mean, by the way, and I will share this a million times until I'm blue in the face. It doesn't mean I need to, quote, lose my ego, right? Because everybody has an ego. You can't get rid of it. And if you do, you're probably going to have a lot of mental issues, because, the ego is your self-construction. It's how I know to put food in my mouth rather than Eugene's mouth, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to make sure that it's in check, and that it has its place, and it's not in the driver's seat. The ego is a tool. It shouldn't be the driver of the car, so to speak. And so with that said, that is the rule for you guys, to understand the paradox between the fact that you need to roll like that no mistakes exist, but at the same time, you have to objectively look at your mistakes with a magnifying glass when they're made.
So what do you think about dissecting? Like if you're going to, we talked about distinguishing good versus bad performance. All right. Mm-hmm. So that's not always dependent on win or loss. You can have a bad performance and win.
Sure. I've had them
lose.
Mm-hmm.
How do you dissect, or what do you think are like the guidelines for you personally, maybe for other people? Like, hey, this is a good performance. This is a bad performance. I think for me it's like having a certain game plan and trying to execute it, or if you do that, or go for even attempting movements or techniques that maybe you've set out to attempt or achieve. So what is it for you? What do you think?
Well, I think before we get into me, I think it's one of these things where you really have to understand who you are and what's important to you. Because some people will judge their performances only on whether they got the W or the L.
Yep.
Right? So they don't care about how the match was won. Winning is all that's important. Right? And then likewise, if they lose, then it doesn't matter how they lost. If they lost, then it was a bad performance. Right? That's some people.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm a little different because I'm not. I look at jiu-jitsu as a way to challenge myself. I look at it as a way for like growth, for self-discovery, for different things like that. It's more of an internal thing going on. When I was younger, there was very much this: I want to prove myself to my little tribe. I want to win. I want to do all these things. As I've gotten older, it's more about me. And so I have different philosophies on things. And one of the philosophies for me, whether or not it was a good or a bad performance, is sort of, again, conquering some of the things that I struggled with when I was younger. So, for instance, the idea of starting to worry too much. If I go out and compete, here's a great example, because you said winning and losing and having, what would seem contradictory ideas, right? So I've lost matches. I've won matches where I've had what I consider a bad performance. That bad performance being that I really didn't go for it. And there were opportunities to do it, but I didn't take them because I was too worried. I was too worried about what if this is going to happen. I didn't want to look bad in front of someone or, whatever, that kind of normal BS. And then likewise, I've had really good performances that I consider were good, where I lost. And they were good performances because I felt like I was throwing the kitchen sink at someone. My technique at the end of it, I thought looked good. And I felt like it was a good showcase of my jiu-jitsu, regardless of what the outcome was. Mm-hmm. There have been matches where I've lost on like a small margin of points, where if this had been a roll in the gym, I would have felt like I got the better of the person. But because I didn't put a hook in for one more second, because I didn't adjust a little angle this way or that way, I lost on points because I wasn't playing the points game. Now, I still felt like it was a good performance of my jiu-jitsu. I just had to be a little bit more intelligent about the points. So again, it's one of these things where I have my own challenges and I look at it a different way, but I don't just sum it up to win and loss. And I think that for anybody else, you have to really take a step back and say, what does this really mean to me? And I think this is important for everyone. Like, you need to, as you're like listening to other people's ideas and philosophies and reading books on ideas and philosophies, you should be taking bits and pieces and saying, what are my philosophies? What are my ideas? Which ones of these do I really connect with? And you really have to think about like what's important to you as a person. And because jiu-jitsu is a part of you, competitions are a facet of your jiu-jitsu. It's not the whole thing, right? If I never compete again, I would still train jiu-jitsu, right? So competition is simply an element to it. And I want that element to support everything else that I'm trying to get out of jiu-jitsu, which a big part of that is I want to become a better, more confident, stronger, more reliant person, who's more self-assured, all these things. And so a lot of what I'm doing when I'm competing is basically trying to push myself in those directions. And so if I compete, kind of go repeating myself here, but if I compete and I was too nervous to pull the trigger and take chances, well, then I'm not really in line with my philosophy as a person. And so I think that everybody needs to make sure that you figure out what's important to you and figure out what your philosophy is and what you would like to get out of this thing, and then kind of go from there. And it can change because, when I was younger, there was I was trying to prove myself. So win and loss was all that mattered. As I got older and after I won some stuff and realized, okay, I've proven myself, now we need to look for different reasons to compete and that sort of thing. What's up, guys? So today's sort of lesson for jiu-jitsu, which will obviously have implications off the mat as well, is sort of an idea about not judging a book by its cover. And you can sort of take this as either an under or overestimation of people or an over or underestimation of yourself. And I have some fun stories to share with you guys about this sort of thing in action. Because I think this is something that we're all guilty of at times. Like when we see people, we make snap judgments. There's that term from, what was it? From Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, and he calls it thin slicing, which is basically just like a lot of times we make snap judgments based upon, and he's talking in this case about art, where like people will look at a statue and they could tell the statue was off or that it wasn't an authentic one by making a quick snap judgment in the blink of an eye, right? And they couldn't necessarily articulate what it was, but they could just tell something was off. And in jiu-jitsu, a lot of times we can do this. If we watch someone show like a really bad self-defense technique, we intuitively know something's off, and we're like, what's wrong with this? And then you have to think about what it is. Well, we do this with people, right? We make snap judgments a lot of times with people and with situations based upon the appearance of things, and you have to be careful with this. And in jiu-jitsu, there was a point, one of my favorite stories of me overestimating myself and underestimating my opponent was there's a guy named Joe Bays, and if you follow competitive grappling, especially in my area, you probably have heard the name before. You might even be super familiar with the name. But Joe is a really, really good leg locker. Now he's so funny because he's a killer. Like he'll take your leg, and he can catch you very well, and he's super, super skilled. But he's so unintimidating to look at, right? To meet him, he's very soft spoken. His voice is relatively low. Like I remember like going to seminars and people were like, "Hey Joe, could you speak up?" Because he just kind of talks like this and he's very quiet, to himself. And so I was at this competition in the middle of like BFE Kentucky. I don't know why this particular tournament had one. It was in like the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. I'm like, why did they have it here? And I mean, it's not one of the main cities. I mean, because basically if you're in Kentucky, you got like Lexington and Louisville, maybe Paducah. But other than that, it's like you don't really have any big cities. And this was like right in the middle of nowhere, about 2 hours out of Louisville. Get to the tournament, and it had a decent showing. But I remember I didn't have anybody in my division to compete against. At the time, I was a purple belt, and so I was in the like expert division. There was no experts at my weight class. And so they said, "Hey, did you want to go up a weight class?" And they said, "We have one guy in that weight class if you would like to go up against him." And they show me this guy in front of me, and it's Joe. And Joe at the time was, maybe 225 pounds, a little bit on the chubby side because Joe's not a huge guy anyway. And I looked at him and he seemed very nice. In my head, I'm thinking, oh, about to kill this guy, right? Because who is this guy? This kind of like chubby guy. I'm about to kill him, And I remember we had 2 matches, best 2 out of 3. First match, I go out there and I'm like, I don't respect anything that he's doing at all. And within 20 seconds, maybe 25 seconds, he had me in a heel hook. And I remember because he pulled half guard, I put a little squeeze on him. Like, I'm about to squeeze the crap out of this guy. And then he rolled under me, got me in a heel hook. And I remember I was so surprised that he had me in a heel hook that I sort of stared at him, and I was like almost the term that I would use, just deer to headlights, like what just happened? I'm looking at him, and I remember him having the heel hook sunk in, and he goes, "You okay?" And he's got this submission, and I said, "Yeah, let me go ahead and tap out real quick," right?
Yep.
And then they had best 2 out of 3. He beat me the second time because I didn't have anything for him, and the match wouldn't have gone any different than it did on that day, whether I overestimated or underestimated myself. But in that first match, I definitely overestimated myself compared to Joe, and I paid for it pretty quickly. And I remember I ended up training with Joe the following week. I remember we trained together for like 2 or 3 hours and had some really good training sessions. Learned a lot from training with him because I was able to understand what he was doing to me. Now, sort of a flip side to this is there's been periods where I've underestimated myself. And I think many people will relate with that feeling of like, underestimating your own abilities. You can sometimes hear this with people who have feelings of imposter syndrome, right? That's very common because you underestimate what you can do and what you're capable of. And a lot of times if you're someone that sort of undersells themselves in general terms, then you tend to be someone who you probably don't actually have a good read as to who you really are, because you probably look at yourself in sort of a certain way. And I remember going to a competition one time as a white belt, and this was the very last white belt competition I did. I show up at the competition at my particular weight class. I was on weight, and my friend was not on weight. So we had enough people so that we had 2 people in almost every division as a white belt, including these heavier divisions that I was in. Well, my buddy was overweight. And he was a weight class lower than me. So that put him into my weight class. And so we already had 2 in my weight class. And so someone needed to move up. And so my coach was like, hey, you're the best one out of the 3. So you're going to go up. And I remember I was so frustrated. I was so angry. It ended up being a blessing in a way because the division that I went to was like half the size. Like the guys in the weight class that I was supposed to be in, I mean, there was like, I want to say there was like maybe 30 or 40 people, competitors. It was nuts. And then I went up to one and there was like, I think like 16 of us or something, 8 to 12, something like that, like a normal three or four matches to win kind of bracket. And I go up to this heavier weight class. So now I'm in like the heavyweight, which I want to say it went up to like 220 something, maybe 230. And so all these guys are bigger than me. And I remember in particular, there was this one guy who, he was a big fella, like big square jaw, he's got the big old jaw, big shoulders, broad shoulder, very muscular, and he looked mean as can be. And I remember thinking like, God, I don't want to go against that guy, right? Give me anybody else in this bracket. I don't want that dude. And in the second round, I went against that dude. And I remember locking up with him. And then all of a sudden, like, my body starts to take over. And all of a sudden I'm doing great. And I started to gain more and more confidence throughout that match. And I ended up submitting him eventually with a rear naked choke. But I remember going into that match. And then for the first minute or two, I was a little thrown off and I wasn't as aggressive as I could have been. Because I was overestimating what he could do and underestimating what I could do and how good I was and how big he was and all these things. And again, I think if I would have gone in there and with normal sort of mindset, I would have been better off for it, but it worked out okay. But again, that's just an example of these happening multiple times. And I was even thinking about one of the students at the gym who I had watched. Here's the thing, like I can roll with people and I can generally get an idea of who's better, right? Again, I can't explain to you necessarily why all the time, but I can be like, yeah, that guy's a little bit tougher than that guy. And I bet he could beat him if they rolled together. You just kind of feel it. It's an intuition. Had a blue belt in the gym years ago. And I remember watching him sometimes roll with people who would have like higher belts on, right? And watch him struggle with them, even though in my opinion, he should have been able to beat them, because we would have visitors come in and I'm like looking at him rolling with a guy that I had no trouble with whatsoever. I'm like, why is he struggling with that guy? I think he got spooked by the belt. I've seen a lot of people do this before. And then I remember watching him one day come in and there was a brown belt that visited, but it was a no-gi day. And I remember the student rolling with that brown belt and actually kind of getting the better of him. And the brown belt wasn't a slouch. He was a pretty good brown belt. But again, the blue belt was a bit bigger and was able to do some stuff on him. And I remember afterwards telling him, oh yeah, that guy's a brown belt, by the way. And his ears, like his eyes popped out. He's like, oh really? Like, I was, I was almost like glad I didn't tell him that he was a brown belt beforehand, because I bet he would have like laid down a little bit easier. Because in his head, he would have been like, oh, this guy's supposed to beat me. So, I'm not really going to go for things. Cause a lot of people do this. I know that like a lot of people will sometimes. I just answered a question the other day where someone was like, hey Chewy, how should I roll with my coach? Because he's a black belt and I'm a white belt. I'm like, you just roll with him. Because a lot of times people get so worried about like the person's skill that they don't even focus on themselves and what they could do. And so that's a problem. And so again, this is an idea. Now, off the mats, you can think about what this sort of implicates, right? For instance, I have students whom, if you were to meet them, you would not, like by looking at them, you would not get an idea as to who that person really is. Or how intelligent that person is, or how much of a bookworm that person is. And I even used to be this way, where I remember I would go to fights, and people would look at me, and sometimes I've always been kind of a clean cut guy. I'm not like, I don't have any tattoos. I don't look mean. I haven't served any time in prison or anything like that. So I would go to these MMA fights and you'd have all these guys that were just mean looking. They'd have all these crazy tattoos and they'd have scary nicknames and all this stuff. And, I would go out there and beat a lot of these guys, but it would be funny because they would put me in there. And the crowd would like, I remember there's a fun story. I was going into a fight once, and I went against this guy who was like, he looked like an action figure. He was just shredded to bits. And I've never been a shredded guy. I'm big and strong, but I've never been like super duper lean. And if I do get lean, it's like a fight to get there. I don't stay there for too long because it's a fight for me to get lean at all. And I remember I fought this guy. When I'm going into the ring, there were these guys that knew me from different previous fights and had been around the fight community at the time. And so I'm coming to the ring and they're up in the stands making bets with their friends, right? They're like, I got this guy and I got this guy. Well, I come to the ring and, I get in the ring and I'm kind of this like pasty looking like white guy with no tan. And I'm not super muscular looking. And I remember the guys next to him, he said that they were like, oh man, I'm putting my money on the dude, the ripped guy. And they were like, okay, well, we'll bet like they were betting like several $100s for like, yeah, we'll take that bet. We'll put our money on the pasty white guy. And, the pasty white guy won that fight. And, I just think it's just an interesting thing. And then a lot of times, like, even before I started doing the YouTube stuff, right? Like a lot of people, when they would get to meet me, would get to be surprised that like, I'm a bit of a bookworm because they think of it as a fighter. They think of someone that's like doing all this stuff. They think about these things. And so it's just a general idea, but I think it's important because you have to sort of, it's better to go into situations, I think, a lot of times without preconceived notions of what something is, who someone is, how things are going to go. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we get ourselves in trouble when we do that, right? Like when we sometimes if we undersell ourselves and we don't perform up to our abilities because we go into it with a preconceived idea of the way things are going to go, or even when we meet people, we go into these relationships with people with a preconceived notion of how things are going to go with this person because of who we think the person is, rather than just allowing things to come and let them happen as they may. And I think that's a useful thing for jiu-jitsu. And I think it's useful off the mats as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's a thing that I do feel for me personally that if I overestimate my abilities and I'm more confident, like I feel like I'm better than the other basically, if I look at them and, like you said, they look out of shape or something, whatever. Or, they have even if I don't know their belt, but maybe I feel like I'm more physically fit or I feel really confident against that person. And I overestimate, I think I do better because I'm more, I think I go for more things. I'm more confident in my techniques. I believe in my techniques more than versus like I'm going against somebody that I know is, or maybe I'm like a blue belt going against a brown belt or something. I'm gonna be more reserved. I'm not gonna really show my game as much. I'm gonna feel like they're gonna be better than me. So I feel like for me personally, like my confidence is one of those things that I always kind of fight with a little bit. As I feel like when I feel good about myself, I feel like my abilities kind of follow through versus the other way around. So I don't know your opinion. Do you think there's one, if you had to choose one way to be, oversell yourself or undersell yourself, what would you prefer?
I think there's it's different for everyone, because everybody's a little bit different. And even with these ideas that are here on this podcast, right? Like the idea is to take them and use them and see what they do for you. It's interesting. So I don't necessarily like going into situations overconfident because I want to be on edge a little bit, because I always want to remind myself that this person can beat me. If I don't play right, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, they can beat me, because I've had some situations where I was very relaxed and overconfident, and that didn't serve me very well, because when I went in there and I was too relaxed, I didn't respect the fact that this person may be just as good as I am. But at the same time, when I go in and I'm underselling myself, I don't do very well either. I think there's kind of a middle ground where I like to go into a competition with my morale high and my confidence in my techniques high from rolling, knowing that I'm good, right? And I have to remind myself, like, because that's another thing too, because I struggle with this too. I am in a situation where, generally speaking, like when I go to seminars, just as an example, I generally don't have any trouble rolling with any black belts, the only black belts I really have a lot of trouble rolling with. And when I say trouble, I mean, like, I can't even hang with them, right? Like, maybe let's make that distinction. Because I have lots of black belts that I have great training with. Sure. But when I'm saying like trouble, I'm talking about like where I don't even feel like I'm in the same class as them. That typically only happens when I go with like really high level guys, like say a JT Torres, or a Muhammad or someone like that. Like those are the guys where I'm like, I'm not in this class. They're above my league. But generally speaking, otherwise, like I roll with plenty of black belts. And I'm like, yeah, I belong here. I'm fine. Um, but I like to go in with, morale high, my confidence high, but completely like a blank slate as far as what's going to happen. Like I don't make any sort of bones about like what's going to happen. Like when I'm getting ready to compete, I remind myself that I'm really good at jiu-jitsu and that, you're going to have to be very, very good to beat me. It's just a fact. It's not a me feeling good about myself and making an affirmation about what could happen someday. It's just what is right now. I'm very good at jiu-jitsu, but I like to go in like clean as a whistle and basically just like, let's see what happens. And that's the way that I like to compete, because when I go in like that, where I'm not really thinking about the other person, is when I perform my best. When I'm just sort of thinking about like, okay, how am I going to use this technique on this person? Or when essentially sometimes when I just turn my brain off and go, and that's probably the best times, because there's these weird moments in competition and even rolling sometimes where when I have my best moments is when I'm not really thinking about anything at all. And I go out there and compete. And then afterwards I get off the mat. I'm looking at myself. I'm like, I watch the videos. I'm like, who is this? Like that was cool. Like, how did I do that? Like sometimes I'll do moves I just made up on the fly, or sometimes when I'm rolling in the gym, it's the same way. Sometimes I'll be in a good state of mind. And it's like things are happening and I'm not really thinking about them at all. I'm not making, judgments as to whether or not I'm feeling good or whatever. I'm just going. And so somewhere in the middle of all that is where I like to be.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is kind of, and we talked about it on a previous episode, is a flow state. You're kind of in a loose flow state where your body's kind of intuitively moving and responding and reacting and doing what it needs to do based on the inputs that it receives. And you're not really, I think, the expectations. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. For somebody of your caliber that's been training for a long time, that usually is the best guy in the room. I think you fall on the side of like, I could overestimate my ability sometimes, but some other people, like even myself, I feel like I'm always, I need to always build myself up. Like I feel like I tend to be on the other side. I don't give myself enough credit. I don't, I always am very hard on myself. So I think like for me, I've always been that way. I've always been very critical of myself.
But hard on yourself in what way?
I'm critical. I'm critical of myself. Instead of, I'm very easy. I'll easily do negative self-talk. Like I'm prone to negative self-talk, and I'm less likely when I do something well to give myself praise or like build myself up. I will, but I veer towards that. If I had to to put a scale to it, I'm 60% on the side where I'm like, and that negative self-talk, for me is like, I use it as a motivator, but also can hinder you, because then you kind of beat yourself down a couple pegs, and then you may not perform to your abilities because of that, or you may feel that other people are better than you when really they're not, and you're just your own person. For me personally, it was like in soccer. When I played soccer in high school, it was funny, right? When I played in for my team, like in school, I was kind of not great. I was mediocre. When I played like club soccer, when it wasn't as important and meaning as much, man, I was all over. I was doing great. I was just like, because I didn't really care. I didn't feel the pressure. I didn't put the pressure on myself to perform a certain way. So that was one of my things, is my mental side of and athletically, I was always fairly athletic and physically in good shape. It was never that. It was a lot of it for me was the mental side of things. So that's just for.
But yeah, but see right there, like that's again sort of that's an issue of like making judgments upon it, right? Like, just like it being open to what comes, right? Like, so just like you make no judgment on whether this person's going to be better or whatever, you're just going to go after them and do what you got to do.
Exactly.
When things happen, you can't make like a judgment on it as to like and beat yourself up with it. I mean, you can want to do better, of course.
Absolutely.
And someone should always want to do better, and you should want to improve and be the best and show the best abilities that you possibly have. But at the same time, I think we get into like a trap, because I was talking about it this morning in the gym, where when we come into the gym, we were doing it. Here's what was going on. We were doing a drill where I was having the students, and I think I've talked about this before on the podcast. I had one person in offense, one person in defense. The offensive person could do whatever they wanted to, but they could only finish with leg locks. The defensive person could defend, but they could not use their hands. Now they could use their hands to post on the mat and move around, but they could not grab the person and they could not defend with leg locks with their hands. They just had to use their feet, pummeling and everything else. And the reason why I was doing it was, one, to bring hyper awareness to the feet, because just like an injury, sometimes if we injure our shoulder, we get really good about protecting it, right?
Mhm.
Because we bring that awareness, that consciousness towards that part of our body. And the whole point is, like, let's say if you're going up against a leg locker, you should be bringing a certain amount of consciousness to your feet and being a sort of understanding of where they are in space at all times. If you're up against someone that's a leg locker, right? And then the other thing is to break people of not wanting to get submitted, because you're only using your feet to defend and they've got all their weapons. They're going to submit you at some point. And so to break people, because a lot of people are resistant towards tapping, or resistant towards losing, and resistant towards, quote, doing bad, right? But that's the issue too, is because when people come into the gym, and this is where I'm getting with this, we come into the gym and we've been conditioned from the outside world that there's some sort of right or wrong way to do things, that there's a good and a bad, there's a positive and a negative towards things. And sometimes things are just happening, right? There's not a good or a bad, it's just happening. And I think that a lot of times we do a disservice to ourselves sometimes when we sort of place judgments of positive or negative or good or bad on them, when it's just something happened. You made a mistake, fix it. And it's fine. It's not good or bad. It just is. And I think that because I know that when I was younger, I had a hell of a time looking at my mistakes, because I would always think that they were good, or excuse me, always bad. And it was hard for me to look at myself doing something that I thought was bad, or me doing something that was bad, or me doing the wrong stuff. And it was such a mental thing, right? And once I stopped sort of putting those judgments on them, I could learn a lot more from them. And at the same time, because I'm not worried about doing the bad thing or the wrong thing, I'm not so scared about going for things either, because if I screw up, I'm like, so what? It happens, instead of going into and placing some sort of judgment upon it if it doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a thing that a lot of us have to overcome, because it's so conditioned to ourselves from the outside world around us.
Yeah, or even assigning blame to like blaming yourself, or because if you assign, it's like that's something I've worked on, is not like blaming. Like, say somebody, you get caught in a submission, don't blame yourself or blame this, or just like you're right, like it happened. What can I learn from this situation? What can I learn from this setup? Is there something that can be? And for me, usually, like those painful experiences, like we talked about, are the things that really jumpstart my my process of focusing and correcting things. So like, I mean, I've learned to kind of appreciate those negatives, and not really assign too much blame, and just not be too hard on myself. So that's something I've worked on. But what do you recommend, Chewy? Like, I was going to ask you, man, like white belts, obviously you're the lowest person, on the totem pole. You're kind of least skilled in most cases, with the occasional wrestler that's a, national champion. But what do you think as far as like, how do you avoid being spooked by others? Like, how do you, like, say your student comes to you and they're a white belt and they just don't feel like, they just don't have any confidence. So what do you tell them, like, to maybe not look at that blue belt and be scared of them, or a purple belt or what have you, and kind of play their game?
Well, first off, going back to what you were just saying a second ago, like, don't perceive things as like negative or positive. They just are. If someone beats you, it just happened. So what? Well, like, you perceive it as negative, but for them it's a positive, right? Like, so which one's the right one? There is no right one. It's just a thing. It just happened. And who's to say that the person's never supposed to beat you? They're training hard too. And so again, you just have to remove that sort of bullshit mindset of it, where it's just like, it just happens. Yeah. Like, don't overthink it too much. And the only reason I know this is because I had the mindset that negative mindset of like, I'd beat myself up. Literally, I used to have a picture on my phone of me getting choked by someone, right? They put me in a guillotine choke, and I had it on my phone. So every time I brought my phone up, as an old flip phone, I would have it staring at me getting choked. And then like the message, like the welcome message when I opened my phone was like, "Go train, asshole." Right? Like, it was that. And the thing is like, I could train myself stupid, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I was going about it the smartest way, and it also doesn't mean that I got any better because of it. I trained really hard, but like, as I've gotten older, I realized like there is training harder. You can't be lazy, but you do have to train intelligently if you want to get better. If you truly want to get better, you have to be very deliberate with your practice if you want to improve. But going back to the spooked by others thing, right? So spooked. Again, why are you going to be spooked if you don't care about the outcome so much? Right? You're only getting spooked because you're placing some sort of judgment upon their belt and over or underestimating what they can do, or what you can do. And then you're getting worried because then a lot of times what we've all done is you go against someone and you're like, I want to go for this move, but what if this happens? Or what if they're like, it feels like I could go for a guard pass, but what if I go for that guard pass and they do this? Or what if they're letting me do this and they're just going to bait me into something?
Yeah.
Who cares? Go for it. Right? I mean, that's how you learn. And again, I think the problem is when you sort of put too much thought of it. It's like the idea from like, what is it? Judo, right? Like mushin, no shin, no mind. Yeah. Right? Like just don't think about it. It's not a thing. But again, when we view everything in that view is like, it's a test. There's a pass and there's a fail. There's a good and a bad. There's red ink or there's going to be the black ink that gives, it's like, it's that kind of stuff. And so we're doing jiu-jitsu where like you're rolling with someone and you feel like it's like a test for something. Which there's a test to yourself every day.
Sure.
But again, it's to you, it's your own personal journey that you're on. So it doesn't matter about them. And if things don't go well, then so what? But if you were independent of the outcome, right? If you're not worried about what happens so much, if you want to improve and you want to go for things, but you're not worried about failing, well, then why would you be spooked? Because the outcome's not going to bother you. You're not going to take it personally. We get spooked because of taking the things that happen and we take them too personally, or we assign them as negative or positive. So it's my rant on that.
All right, guys. Thank you all for checking out the episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We appreciate you tuning in.
Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Thanks to our buddies over at Improvng. Improvng is a jiu-jitsu brand company made by jiu-jitsu practitioners, right? It's people like us that are training, doing the damn thing, out there competing sometimes, living the lifestyle, and then also, selling cool gear. And so if you guys want to check them out, go to rollbjj.com. And the promo code to save 20% is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. Also, if you guys want to check out our longtime sponsor, Charlotte's Web, and get some of their CBD, CBN products, or even some of their functional mushroom products like lion's mane and reishi to assist with a number of different functions, go to their website at charlottesweb.com. And they have a huge discount, 30% off. So you go use the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order on whatever you buy. Again, this is stuff that I think is really useful. I give my students samples, and a lot of them end up getting more of it. Many of you had sent me messages saying you enjoy the products. And so, again, they've been a long-time sponsor, and we appreciate them and check them out. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast directly, you can roll on over to our website at patreon.com/the Chewjitsu podcast. When you go there, you check out all the perks that we offer. There's a whole list of them on the site. You can see the different tiers and everything else that you can join up as. And when you join up, you'll be supporting the podcast you're listening to for less than probably a Starbucks run or a fast food run or food run at Chipotle or whatever, So again, if you guys want to check it out, we appreciate it. You go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, jiu-jitsu.net/join. And when you go to that website, that will give you access to my daily email that I send out. And thousands and thousands of people read that damn thing, more than I ever thought would have ever read it. It's crazy. And when you get that daily email, I will go through different ideas, but I go through all kinds of different stuff. I'll even send out different like book lists, generally like once or twice a year, with just a list of books you can check out, and also send out jiu-jitsu tips, and also give special offers to people, where basically you get discounts that I don't send anywhere else. And so you can check it out at jiu-jitsu.net/join. And when you join up, you will get my Focus Jiu-Jitsu ebook and video, which goes into 12 different strategies. And again, I ramble on in the video a bit more, so there's more than there, but I go through different strategies on how you can improve faster. As we talk about on the podcast today, improving in jiu-jitsu requires focus. And the less time you have, the more focused you need to be, because you don't have the window to just make up for bad training with more effort, more time. You don't have it. And so you got to be dialed in. And so this will give you some strategies on how to do that and like where to start. So if you're thinking, okay, I want to be focused, what should I do? It'll give you different strategies that you can implement during open rolling. So you don't have to even do drilling or nothing like that. It can just give you strategies and questions to ask yourself and ways to think about what could I do to get the most out of my open rolls. So if you guys want to get access to that, check it out at chewjitsu.net/join to do that. And guys, that's it for the podcast. Thank you as always, and we'll talk to you next time.